Good morning, everyone, and welcome at the Institute for the Danube Region in Central Europe. My name is Nino Muto. I'm a research associate here at the IDM, and I will host today's discussion about the South Caucasus in transition, connectivity, regional cooperation, and European perspectives. But before that, I would like to welcome Christopher Hammer, who is the chairman of the IDM board, for some welcoming remarks, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the IDN, to the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe here in Vienna. As it was already mentioned, my name is Friedrich Faulhammer, and I'm the chairman of the board of the IDM. And it's my pleasure to say a few opening words with some perspectives I would bring in to your discussion, maybe. At the IBM, we have a long-standing experience in working on questions of regional cooperation, European integration, and the political and economic transformations, shaping Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. Our focus has always been on regions that are located at the intersection of larger geopolitical dynamics. Regions that are not only shaped by external forces, but actively shape Europe's future themselves. Today, we are deliberately extending this perspective beyond our core geographic focus to take a closer look at the South Caucasus in transition. This is a quite obvious step for us. The issues we examine in the Danube region, such as connectivity, resilience, integration, and the management of geopolitical pressure, resonate strongly in the South Caucasus as well. So it is my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished guests, whether you have traveled across Europe, across the Danube, or just across town to be here. Thank you all for joining us. Rusif Husseinov, the director of the Topchubashov Center, Federica Mangiamelli, senior program manager at Globsec, and Sebastian Schäffer, our IDM director. The South Caucasus is currently undergoing major transformations that are worth to be observed, analyzed, and discussed. A lot is happening at once. There are some remains of instability and power competition, but also new connections are being built, and we observe an increasing influence on the discussions between Europe and Asia. And even if the South Caucasus and Central Europe may seem like two different corners of the map, today's discussions will show that they have more in common than one might think. Both regions have experienced remarkable periods of change and continue to actively shape their future. Sitting at important crossroads and building bridges between regions, the South Caucasus and Central Europe are sometimes considered small geographically, yet they keep on proving their strategic significance. Both regions have had and still have to deal with large neighboring powers and remain resilient in the face of external pressure in shifting geopolitical environments. Dear colleagues, the following panel discussion and your inputs from the audience will be a great opportunity not only to reflect on the challenges of transition, but also to identify lessons learned and pathways for greater cooperation and resilience in the face of common difficulties and obstacles. It promises to be an exciting and insightful morning, and today's direct engagement with the South Caucasus that will follow is certainly not the last one. This discussion will be followed by the signing of a memorandum of understanding between our institute and the Topchubashov Center. We are very inspired to begin this cooperation, as it has always been our priority here at the IDM to contribute to exchanges across borders, to get to know other regions, and also improve the understanding of our partners on Central European dynamics. So thank you once again for being here. And unfortunately, I will not be able to stay because I must attend another meeting. But I'm happy to see that Georg Karlsenberg, another member of our board, is present in the meeting and will stay. And I'm sure you will give us then a good report in our next meeting of the board, what has happened in this discussion. And I do hope that you will enjoy the discussions today. And now I will hand over to Rusif Husainov, the director of the Topçu Bashev Center, coming directly from Azerbaijan. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Colleagues, good morning.
Thank you very much for this lovely opening speech. Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for attending this event. 2 years ago, in early May, I received an email from an Austrian researcher who asked for a meeting on September 24th or 25th. During his visit to Baku, he wanted to visit. I responded to him by saying, in principle, yes, we can meet, but why don't you write to me just 1 week before? It's a country of short notices, Azerbaijan. And I'm very glad that our Austrian colleagues are also adapting to this Azerbaijani working style, because this event was implemented in less than a month. Although the discussions about the MoU, about this type of session had been going for several months. But short notices, this type of rhythm, flexibility is not just part of our mentality. It's our organization at the beginning of every year is preparing a yearly plan. Very difficult to follow, very difficult to implement. We switch to quarterly and monthly plans, still difficult or sometimes impossible to materialize this. Again, it's not about mentality only, but it's also about the pace of changes in South Caucasus. As you, Farham, said in the beginning, we are undergoing profound transformation in our small region, and at extraordinary speed. And sometimes we joke inside our office about an op-ed which we may start in the morning. An op-ed, just 800 words, may easily get outdated by the afternoon. This is how these changes are shaping our work as well. I don't want to speak too much because we will have some discussion and interesting topics will definitely be raised, but I really want to thank my colleagues, all the parties who were involved, Sebastian, Sofia, and Federica, Ninon, for organizing this event, for working on the memorandum of understanding. We already have some ideas. We'll brainstorm them after the event as well. But I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to really some new activities in autumn. Thank you very much, and I'm really grateful to all of you. Despite July, despite summer mode, you are all here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I will now invite all our panelists to join me. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Federica from Prospect, Sebastian from IBM, Lucy from the Topçu Bashev Center. We are co-organizing this event today. Today for our discussion, we will have around 90 minutes. I will go through a few rounds of questions for all of you, and then I will open the floor to the audience so that you can also ask your question to our speakers. The event today is not live streamed, but it is recorded, as you could see before, and it will eventually be posted later on the IBM's YouTube channel. And well, I guess let's start. Let's have a first one. I have a common question for the three of you, because I have the feeling that in the past, the South Caucasus was more this geographical concept, and that maybe right now, for the first time, it has this opportunity to be this integrated politically, economically, and internationally recognized region. And there are many regions in the world that have this potential to be geographically important, but not that many have succeeded in transforming this into regional influence. And I think we can say that the Danube region right now succeeded in this. And so my question is quite simple. Do you think it is the South Caucasus moment for this? And building on the experience of Central Europe, do you think that what do you think are the ingredients for this success? Maybe we can start with you, Federica.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to Sebastian, to IDM, to give me the opportunity to take part in this conversation, and at least very much to actually meet in person Rusif, with whom I have been following for quite a few years. South Caucasus is one of those topics, one of those regions that have always sparked my interest, and that I had the chance to discover slowly over the years. And it's interesting, the question you ask about comparing it to Central Europe. The concept of region is a very we can say it's a very rigid concept. It's mainly geographic, but everything that is inside of it is extremely dynamic. Regional cooperation, it's also an experiment that Europe has had to do in its life. The USDR started in 2009 and started operating in 2011. Is considered one of probably the most successful experiments in this sense. You have regions that finally understand that the things they have in common and the advantages of cooperation can be stronger than any of their differences. And I think this is one of the aspects that then can be used, because part of the USDR, it's not just EU member states, but there are still countries that are not part of the EU, but hopefully they will be. And it's just about learning practices that then can be useful for a successful EU integration. Now, if we have if we make a comparison, this successful regional integration was not born overnight. It's not like after 1989, Central Europe became this prosperous area where connectivity was great, where the economy was flourishing. It was a process. And therefore, I don't want to be the pessimistic person in the panel. We have to also, when we talk about the South Caucasus, put things in a long-term perspective and understand that it will take time. And it will also be important for the policymakers, but also for institutes like Rusif's Institute to work on the societal resilience and build the trust that is inequivocally shattered after decades of a conflict. Because the elephant in the room is probably the fact that South Caucasus has lived a very fragile situation when it comes to politics, and has faced a conflict for a very, very long time. I mean, we are in the state where on the 7th of June in Armenia we had elections, and it seems that Armenia has chosen its pro-Western path and has provoked a rupture with its Russian tradition. And at the same time, just 2 days ago, there was this big announcement that the European Commission has approved this global getaway strategy. We are talking about 200,000 million to invest in infrastructure development, in connectivity, and in digitalization. Transport, digitalization, and connectivity are some of the pillars actually of USDR, if we want to also make this comparison. So the good news is that we are on a good path. Now, what I think the seizing the moment would be, I think the three priorities when it comes to seizing the moment would be to kind of desecurization of the economy, and so trying to build that trust, that societal resilience, and also at economic level, because the plan for the EU is to have 200 million, to give 200 billion in investment funds, in investment grants, in grants, but at the same time to leverage 2 billion investments. And this investment will also have to come from private capital. Investment from private capital are very accessible to the fragility and the volatility of the society and of the region. So the stronger and the stronger the region is, the better it is for investment coming from abroad. So this is an important factor. A harmonization of regulations. We don't need only connectivity, but we also have to regulate this the new routes that will connect the region of the South Caucasus, and also the local ownership. Because is it true that the USDR was prompted was support endorsed by Brussels, but it was also very much prompted by the region, and especially Austria and Romania played a great role in advancing this strategy. So it is important that regardless of the EU or the US influence in the region, it's the country, it's the region that has to push, who has to do the greatest push. So to answer to the question, I think it is a moment, but there's many different variables that in long term will have to align.
Thank you. Bastian, what is your opinion on that?
Thank you. Yeah, Federica mentioned a lot of the important points with the macro-regional cooperation. I think, and maybe so the European Union likes to do this around bodies of water. So maybe there's not a river in the South Caucasus that we build it around, but maybe it has to be rather the sea that we build it around. Yeah? But I very much remember vividly when I was organizing between 2019 or even earlier and 2020, because the last trip I did before the Corona lockdown, was actually to Baku. And we did there a series of seminars where we did future scenarios. We did that in Georgia, we did that in Armenia, and then we did it in Azerbaijan in different configurations, etc. But it was very interesting to see how in these future scenarios for the region, there was always also a scenario where there would be some sort of integrating of those countries together against bigger external threats. And I think even if European integration is not necessarily modeled against a bigger external threat, but rather the idea was to overcome enmity amongst nations. Nowadays, when we talk about European Union integration and especially EU enlargement, it is very much driven by an external factor, and the other elephant. I mean, that's rather. Is that an English thing, like the elephant in the porcelain store? Yeah. So I mean, it's not an elephant in the room; it's an elephant in the porcelain store in a China shop. Very good. Thank you. Because I mean, it's everything we had about European integration and the security architecture has been shattered at the latest on the 24th of February 2022. And this has, of course, also ripple effects into the South Caucasus. We know that there has been for me still very hard, I mean, being that far away, very hard to grasp transformation in Georgia from being a candidate country to becoming a Russian proxy after having been invaded, not even 2 decades ago. Then, as Federica mentioned, the turnaround, which is also caused, I mean, the situation that we had with Nagorno-Karabakh, but also Armenia, moving towards Western integration is also caused by the Russian Federation. So it's very, very interesting to see how within that small region, we can see developments that are linked to Central Europe in a broader sense. So there is external actors that cause fundamental rapid shifts that we have not thought would be possible a couple of years back. And this is really something where we see this connection, I would say. There is something that unites us or links us. The challenging thing is that there are no lessons yet from Central Europe. There are no good lessons to it. There are countries that are very resilient. We look at, for instance, Moldova. I would say it's a very good example how resilient they are against Russian interference. And I think Armenia learned also from that. In fact, I know when we were in Chisinau, I was asking, talking with people, they had an exchange with Armenians, and this is why they probably were that successful in their parliamentary elections, which were democratic and not to a certain extent influenced by the Russian Federation. But on the other hand, there's also weaknesses that are constantly exposed. And this is something that happens where Russian influence is very successful. And this is present in Central Europe, but also in the South Caucasus. I think there are other factors to it, and I think we're going to talk about this. But yeah, this is the initial thoughts that I would have for that.
Sure, thanks. Usif, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you. Last year, I spent several months in Central Europe as a Visegrad fellowship holder. I traveled across Hungary, Poland, Czechia, and Slovakia in order to study the Visegrad integration model, its accomplishments, and maybe failures as well. And the idea, that was the topic of my fellowship. The idea was to draw certain lessons for possible South Caucasus integration in the future. And prior to this, some 8 or 10 years ago, I was also living in Estonia. And even back then, I was already fascinated by the level of Baltic integration. And these debates about integrating South Caucasus, which is geographically very, very small, but politically and geopolitically very fragmented, is happening nowadays. And it's underway in all 3 capitals and even beyond. I mean, Baku, Tbilisi, and Yerevan. Maybe if we consider the European models very sophisticated or advanced for ourselves, then we can simply turn our head eastward and just see what is happening across the Caspian Sea, Central Asia. Despite all the differences, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan had border clashes with severe casualties several years ago. They still have certain regional identities. They organize regional summits, and sometimes they come against certain geopolitical trends, or they meet certain external powers as a united region. This is why we have C5 plus US, EU, Japan, India, and so on. The South Caucasus, for more than 30 years, we did not have any regional mechanism, any regional cooperation subject. It was obvious because of the Karabakh conflict, which dominated the entire geopolitical picture of the region, but also it was largely driven also by the foreign policy priorities of the 3 countries. Georgia, until recently, was anchored mostly in the Western institutions, at least committed to be pro-Western in its constitution. Armenia became a member of the Russian-led Eurasian structures. Azerbaijan decided to avoid this binary choice and instead pursued what they call balancing or multilateral policies, or my favorite term is equidistance, an equal distance from both competing geopolitical blocks. Nowadays, after the Karabakh conflict and after Azerbaijan established its territorial integrity, and due to peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there is a huge chance for starting some sort of regional integration in South Caucasus. And maybe we can address what they usually call low politics as a starting point. Joint water management issues is also something which we discussed in Azerbaijan and in South Caucasus in general. The Kura and Aras rivers, they are shared by 3 countries plus Turkey. So there is already a platform where 3 countries can come together, or biodiversity and environmental issues, or disaster response mechanisms, because when floods or earthquakes happen, they do not recognize physical boundaries. So we already have identified certain topics where 3 countries can start already discussing certain low political subjects. And I'm very optimistic that this integration may start sooner or later, but sooner is better. And it's not only about South Caucasus itself, but it's also about the regional resilience, which you also mentioned, Sebastian and Federica, because you would always see one threat which is coming from the east, Russia, in this specific context. In our case, we are sandwiched between 2 big threats, which is Russia and Iran.
Thank you. Maybe a quick follow-up for you on this matter, because we talked about the external powers that are present in the region, as you say, Iran, like Russia, China, the EU, Turkey as well. And we know that at the moment, the South Caucasus is looking for more connectivity as well, but we know that greater connectivity would bring even more external interest in the region. So how would you see the role of external powers in the region? How could they help in stabilizing the region and also like supporting the cooperation mechanisms, but also leaving the room for the region to like choose their own future?
Okay, I'll start with those countries which I already mentioned, Russia and Iran. You all probably saw this famous flight radar image when the airspace of the South Caucasus was very crowded and the Russian and Iranian airspace was almost empty. This shows how important South Caucasus has become when it became flanked by the 2 regional conflicts of global significance. It has become a bridge between East and West, choke point, whatever term you'd like to call it. At the same time, other countries, they are also taking note of this. They also understand how important this region can become. Regarding Russia and Iran, the way they approach the region, the way they see what is happening in South Caucasus, the way they are behaving towards the peace process, for instance, is quite telling. They are not so happy that finally Armenia and Azerbaijan can reach certain peace and reconciliation, which would definitely reduce their influence and leverage over the regional countries. At the same time, we see a renewed interest of the US, especially after the Washington summit of last year. They already have certain commitments in the TREE project, which can in the future become a part of a bigger geo-economic project, which is the Middle Corridor. But the American involvement can also trigger the possible Iranian reaction, which would definitely like to torpedo this whole project, either solo or in tandem with Russia. Therefore, the only stabilizing factor, which I personally may see in this geopolitical neighborhood, is probably Türkiye, which can at some point become a de facto guarantor for all the 3 countries, because it has military potential to do so. And Turkey-Armenia normalization is also underway. As for the EU can definitely be very helpful because it has quite big expertise of the region, is showing a lot of interest in the reconstruction of Karabakh and also in the construction of infrastructure, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Therefore, there are certain powers which may bring a positive agenda to our region, but there are still those countries, mostly neighbors, who may still have their own toxic agenda for our region.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to talk about a completely different topic with you, Federica. I would like to talk about human rights and civil liberties challenges that are in the South Caucasus, because at the moment some observers talk about some Russification of rights in the South Caucasus because of laws such as the law on transparency of foreign influence that was passed by the Georgian Dream Party in May 2024. This law, of course, it has endangered like the civil society organization, the independent media, and everything. And I guess we can also see those developments in the other countries in the region, in Azerbaijan as well. And I think that these developments, we can also see them within the EU itself, because recently, like 2 weeks ago, Prague was full of protesters that were protesting against Babiš's plan to reform the funding of public media, which would include much more state control in the funding of the media. So you coming from Bratislava, I guess that you have other examples of that. And maybe in this context, how do you interpret these challenges that seem to emerge from the South Caucasus to within the EU itself? And what do you think it tells us about the international order we are experiencing right now?
That's a great question, and I will try to do my best to answer to that, but I think it's very difficult to have like a perfect recipe. The issue is that the EU and NATO membership for the CEE was considered for many years the solution to avoid any sort of authoritarianism, was the guarantee of a democratic future based on respect of human rights and civil liberties and so on. And we've seen within the EU that is not the case, that there's so many more factors that play a role into that, and it's just not just the membership to the EU or to NATO. And the EU, and we have to be a little bit critical here, has not done a great job when it comes to actually make it countering. And now we've seen what happened in Hungary just now, but right now Slovakia and Czech Republic are in a very critical situation. I mean, Slovakia has a foreign agents law, and the freedom of media is highly hindered. And the Czech Republic, you just mentioned now, with the issue is that the influence of political cycles on and the economic regression on the perception of society of the perception of society when it comes to decision maker is straight to the point that people then make I would say I confidently say irrational choices when they have to go to vote. And then the EU has to basically have inside member states that have in place rules that are completely against what are the actual articles of the fundamentals of the EU. When it comes to the South Caucasus, and I can see so just to finish that, I'm not sure the EU can be the preacher in this sense. And on the other hand, in the South Caucasus, we have different tendencies, because if you think about Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, they are all going to different perspective. And with Georgia being basically probably one of the farthest away from what it was 5-6 years ago, from a perspective of EU integration, or a perspective of living in a country with basic liberal civil liberties respect. And at the same time, we have Azerbaijan, where that is basing is strong relations with the EU, and these relations are purely transactional. So there's advantages for the EU and for Azerbaijan to cooperate together, but I do not see an alignment when it comes to values and when it comes to human rights and democracy and rule of law. On the other hand, we are seeing in Armenia a shy attempt to actually to do this switch to the West and to do this approachment towards the EU. They have put in place reforms of the rule of law. They are trying, of course, it's going to be also a long process. But we can see in Armenia, compared to the other two countries, an attempt to integrate or to align to what are the European values. And this is a value-based model that I do not see personally in the other countries. That does not mean that regional cooperation is not possible. It just means that the EU has to decide at one point, and this is probably the question we don't have only with the South Caucasus, we have with many other regions in the world, if our cooperation and our shared interests can be influenced in a way from the sharing of the same values, the core democratic values of the rule of law based order or not. So, and I also would like to add something to what Lucy was saying about the corridor. In the moment, and I want to also mention that I was in the South Caucasus to all three countries, and they always say with neighbors like this, who needs enemies? So this was very interesting perspective on things, but yes, I think regional cooperation can happen, but at the same time, we have to understand how the EU wants to relate to these critical regions when it comes to differences in core founding values.
For sure. I'm sure that Sebastian has a lot to say about that because it relates to my next question. Because it seems that the international order that we are experiencing right now has completely weakened all the mechanisms that were originally designed to hold these backsliding governments accountable. And it also seems that even the EU accession negotiation prospect and everything are no longer an incentive for reforms and for democratic progress, because as we said, like Georgia has postponed its accession negotiation to 2028. They have also dismantled the European Integration Department within the MFA. So to what extent do you think, Sebastian, the EU is putting its credibility at stake in its response to these challenges in the South Caucasus? And also, do you think that enlargement conditionality is losing its credibility and its effectiveness in combating all the illiberal models around the world?
Yeah, thank you. Ooh, big question. Very good question, but very big question. I would add to what Frederica said first, because yeah, I sort of agree that the EU might not be able to preach when they have these problems inside themselves, but we should add to it, it's not the EU, it's the member states. Because, I mean, the member states are undermining this. The member states are acting like that. And as a foreign policy actor, there's only, to a certain extent, that we can blame something that is only the EU. But there are certainly challenges. And I mean, we have talked about this. I mean, I was studying back then, long time ago. And we already talked about this in European integration when it came to, for instance, trade policy with China. There was no mentioning of human rights, but at the same time, you would put it at the very top with regards to values when it comes to fostering EU integration and having new member states. And this is very important. It still remains to be very important. But there is a fundamental challenge that they did not envision when they were preparing for that Big Bang enlargement in 2004. And there is something that we have witnessed that was very incremental in undermining this overall idea that there is a linear development. So what we have not done, neither with the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe that ultimately failed in 2005, nor the Treaty of Lisbon, which is basically the same document but taking out some aspects and splitting into two treaties and not calling it a constitution. We have not implemented security mechanisms. What can the EU properly do if there is more than one country experiencing democratic backsliding for whatever reason. So we have Article 7 procedures, we have possibilities, but we did not assume that there might be two countries that would back each other, because the fundamental flaw here is you need unanimity even if you want to start these infringement procedures. And what we have experienced in 2020 was, for the first time, a country in the Freedom House Index was moving from free to being partially free after being a member of the European Union. And that was Hungary. So for the whole process, I mean, the Freedom House Index is there since the 70s, I think. From the 70s until 2020, there was never the case that when you did go on the track of European integration, that you would, once you have joined the EU, you would be deemed free, that you would slide back in your civil liberties, or it's civil liberties and political freedoms, I think, the two categories there, that someone would slide back to partially free. And that shows that this weakness with not having proper mechanisms in the EU treaties, and this very fact-based analysis of the state within the European Union shows that there is the possibility that these European integration process is being reversed. And actually what we put into the treaty was the possibility to exit the European Union, which we've also experienced. So the overall idea of having this method monnaie, that there is an endpoint in European integration. Yeah. We start with something, we have spillover effects, we work together, it works well, we progress, and at the end, the whole continent will be united and everybody will follow the same rules, work together towards a common goal. This has been dismantled quietly with accepting the Treaty of Lisbon, because now you can bring back certain competences to the nation states, and you can even exit the European Union. And the long answer to that big question here is that the European Union itself has, on the one hand, finally understood, also with the majority of its member states, I think that now is the time to move forward again. But we still have failed to start a discussion on how do we change also those rules that something like this will not happen in the future. Because the more countries you have, the more likely it's going to be. It's simple math. Even I, as a political scientist, understand that. And the point would have been, we've done that before. When we had those enlargement rounds, we always also talked about the treaty. And then we promised in 2003 that the Western Balkan countries can become a member. It took 2 decades, and still taking 2 decades, which is not entirely the fault of the European Union, because I still believe that if Montenegro, for instance, would have pushed at the same speed as they're doing now, something would have been possible earlier. But we have still not had the guts to talk about the treaty. We are not talking about a treaty reform. We mentioned that we might have to, and then maybe a quick fix is to forego veto rights for a certain point and have some transitional periods. We've had that before. The latest point in time to talk about a treaty reform would have been in 2016, June, after the Brexit vote. And this is now a decade ago, and we've not done anything. We're not brave enough because we are afraid that the whole package will then be opened up and we'll never find a solution. I stop with this, which will not be the case. We have a functioning treaty. We can work with this. We can enlarge with it, but we could have a better treaty with better regulations, because the challenges internationally, but also domestically, with regards to values, but also resilience, but also readiness to act, will only increase, and therefore we really need to work on something like this.
And coming back to the South Caucasus, alongside Georgia's postponement of EU accession, I feel like there is maybe also a growing trend of neutrality within the region, with, for instance, Georgia that is increasingly distancing itself from NATO, and we have also Azerbaijan that seems to prefer some bilateral relations instead of the more traditional multilateral security framework. I quite like your term of equidistance that you mentioned previously. And from a Central European perspective, this raises quite interesting comparisons, because we have some models of neutrality here in Austria or also in Moldova. Of course, they have very different security and political context. But maybe, Rusif, can you elaborate a bit more on your concept of equidistance, or what I call non-alignments, but maybe you would tell us more about that. And do you think that these are fundamentally different concepts than the one we know here in Central Europe? Or do they both reflect this trend to try to have a bit more room of maneuver into this increasingly complex international order?
A very good question. Difference between neutrality here in Central Europe and non-alignment or equidistance or multilateralism in South Caucasus is that in the first case, you have a legal and constitutional items which actually provide this neutrality and has turned this into, let's say, strategic identity of Austria. And in the case of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, it's not in the constitution or in the legislations. It's just foreign policy priorities of three countries. In the case of Azerbaijan, yes, equidistance or siding with the non-alignment movement was simply a response to the binary choice which we had in the post-Soviet space for several decades. It's either West or Russia. We have to pick one of these competing blocks. Many countries, they made their choices. They either sided with the Eurasian structures or they decided to go westward. Azerbaijan, and another case would be Uzbekistan. They decided to stay out of this dichotomy. And another reason why you mentioned NATO, for instance, another reason why Azerbaijan decided not to flirt with such ideas, because first of all, we realized it very, very, many years ago that no one would actually accept South Caucasus nations or even other countries in Eastern Europe, such as Moldova or Ukraine, into NATO. They are problematic. They would definitely lead to certain collision with Russia. And we also drew our lessons from 2008 Georgia, 2014 Ukraine, when they were very, very vocal about their NATO aspirations. Instead of, because once the more they are vocal about NATO, the more they irritate the Kremlin, and the more the Kremlin pressurize them, and it creates a vicious circle. And instead of going this way, the Azerbaijani side decided to elevate its the standards of its armed forces with the help of a NATO member state, which is Türkiye, without going for full membership in NATO. And it did not actually irritate the Kremlin. When the Kremlin actually noticed what was happening in the Azerbaijani armed forces, the Azerbaijani-Turkish cooperation had already been strongly established. Nowadays, this equidistance or non-alignment or multilateralism, in the case of Azerbaijan, is entering a new phase. It's trying to invest more and more political capital into creating a new multilateral institution. Maybe at some point in the future, it can be a new geopolitical goal, even this Turkic integration project, which would involve Turkey, Azerbaijan, and some Central Asian countries. It seems for Azerbaijan as more natural because it's kinship based, and it can also be a safer haven for us. Again, instead of going to this dichotomy, West or Russia, we have our own region, which is extending all the way from Türkiye to Central Asia, where Azerbaijan can play a key role and can actually serve as a bridge between the two continents. And one of the most important elements which can actually help us materialize this Turkic integrations project is the Middle Corridor, a geoeconomic project, which definitely unites so many countries, both to our west and to our east.
Thank you. Well, that's very interesting, because at first I thought that maybe this non-alignment or neutrality, whatever, could be a bit of a paradox with the connectivity that you are seeking in the region, but actually you quite explained very well that it's rather an opportunity for that connectivity. Yeah, sure.
Because I find it very, very interesting, because I mean the Kremlin narrative that NATO integration was a preemptive necessity to attack Georgia and Ukraine is, of course, it's not something that is based in a reality, because I mean we've seen that, for instance, the full-scale invasion enlarged NATO, and what did the Kremlin do about it?
I agree totally.
But so now I'm of course we understand that those are narratives, yeah. But on the other hand, I would be interested. Do you think like this, not being vocal about it, but sort of aligning and doing this in a different way? Is this something that would have prevented that in the case of Georgia, for instance, if they would have been less vocal and would have taken the Azerbaijani approach?
Well, it's too difficult for me to speculate about this, but as you said, these are narratives. Of course, they can be false. They can be based on like certain facts, but sometimes these narratives or myths or rumors, they are also very important triggers. They can also mislead certain people or governments, and this is why I also keep an eye on certain narratives. Doesn't matter whether they originate in Russia or in the West, but they are important tools as well. As for your question, I don't have a very specific answer to this. Maybe if Georgia could have gone different way in this or not. If maybe from now on, we may see more Turkish involvement in South Caucasus, and in that case, Turkey can strengthen its bilateral relations with Armenia and Georgia as well. In that case, we can see how this trajectory go and where this path may lead to at the end. But Azerbaijani Turkish context was really different than potential Georgian Turkish context, and therefore I really don't know. But a similar trend is happening nowadays, and maybe at some point in the future, certain accomplishments may give you an answer about this.
Well, Sebastian, actually, you mentioned that the war in Ukraine has completely reshaped the perception of NATO, and this is also what Georgia is using right now, the narrative that if Ukraine did not pursue NATO membership, Russian aggression would not have happened. This is what they use to distance themselves from NATO. But the war in Ukraine has not only changed those perceptions about NATO, but maybe they have also reconfigured Russia's capacity to act across different post-Soviet conflicts at the same time, simultaneously. So how do you see the war in Ukraine? How did it shape the trajectory of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and perhaps maybe how did it help to the resolution of the conflict? And in the future, how do you see the conflict in Ukraine continue to shape the developments in the South Caucasus?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I mean, I need to stress again nowadays, I think that it's obvious that these narratives that were coming were just an excuse to activate what it's a term that comes from the Cold War, the useful idiots. Yeah, so the ones you don't have to pay or bribe or influence or extort, but they do that voluntarily and spread those narratives. And that very much resonated. And it's very clear that this is really not something that is based in any reality, because if this narrative of being circumvented by NATO member states would have been the main security concern of Russia, why did they not react when Finland and Sweden joined? There's nothing. They added thousands of kilometers of NATO border to them, and there's nothing about it. So for me, there are various different reasons why they both invaded Georgia and Ukraine, and we would have to have two different events to talk about. And so I'm not going to do that right now. But what is regarding your question, of course, shaping this year, I think the biggest blow to NATO is not this narrative. The biggest blow to NATO is sitting in the White House, because we have, and again, I mean, these trends not to prevent authoritarian tendencies is not something that is inherently also only exclusively only for the EU. Yeah. There were 4 years where the United States could have implemented some safeguarding mechanisms to prevent someone who, and we forget this and we don't talk about it because we say, well, he was elected. Yeah, he might have been elected, but he should have never been able to run in the first place because he instigated a coup. And we don't talk about this. We just normalize these kind of things because everybody floods the zone with, you know what? We talk about everything else other than the reality that is out there. And so the biggest blow to NATO is coming from Donald Trump, where he constantly is questioning if there will be, and this is the core, Article 5 of NATO will actually be something that he will follow through if it is tested. And that again is a narrative that is coming out of the Kremlin. This is what they are going to try to do if they still have the capacity. And here comes the point, because I've read, we had again a absolute heinous attack on, amongst others, Kiev, but also other Ukrainian cities just in the morning hours of the day before yesterday, which is obviously some sort of retaliation for the Ukrainian armed forces being able to blow up most of the refineries that the Russian Federation has, to an extent where they are now importing gas. Different story, but it's important to raise awareness about it. But the factor that so there was a headline coming out of Sputnik, so Kremlin, that said, amidst those drone and missile attacks on Kiev, the front line of the Ukrainian army is collapsing. And if we remember from the Cold War, well, not that I do remember, from studying how it was, some maybe might actively remember in the audience, that was what was coming out of the Kremlin was most of the time an indicator that this is actually happening inside. So I don't want to speculate, and I think there is also there's good indicators that there is another offensive being prepared from the Russian Federation. But this headline might very well also reflect that there might be a possibility that the Russian armed forces are going to collapse. And what is going to happen then? Now I finally answer your question. We are not prepared for, because we also are not talking about it, that in the foreseeable future, and I mean probably the next decade, there will be insecurity in our vicinity, in both the South Caucasus and Central Europe, because it doesn't matter if the Russian Federation will lose this war. I, of course, hope that they do, but when they do, the Russian Federation will not exist anymore. If they are able to sustain and have some sort of ceasefire, and there will not be a just peace, or there will be even further advancements within Ukraine, they will stand at the immediate borders. Tell you in South Caucasus, they're already there, but then they will be at the immediate EU borders, which will also mean insecurity. And we are not prepared for that. And if there is a collapse of the Russian Federation and not a consolidation, this of course will open up certain avenues, because one of the major hindrances both in Central Europe and also the South Caucasus is of course these frozen conflicts. One has been solved by the absolute overstretch that the Russian Federation did in Ukraine, Karabakh. One is still going on with Abkhazia, South Ossetia. There are frozen conflicts within Central and Eastern Europe that would solve itself the moment the Russian Federation is collapsing, Transnistria. And so this overall development in any direction, I think, will open up windows of opportunity, and if we seize them, we might see a much more stable and integrated future. But we need to be ready for this, and we need to take this into consideration. And I don't have the feeling that we're doing that.
Thank you. Well, we talked about the war in Ukraine, but unfortunately there is another conflict at the doorstep of South Caucasus. The war in Iran. I would like to ask a last question to Federica, but maybe before that, can I have an overview of how many questions you have in the audience for our speakers? We would have 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Well, you can keep them, and I will come back to you shortly after my question to Federica. Because yeah, there is this conflict with in Iran that is just next to South Caucasus that can bring also a lot of instability to the region, with some spillover risk, and also can fuel further tensions, like there are tensions between Azerbaijan and Iran with the Iranian drone incursion in Azerbaijani territory in March. There are also some alleged plots of terrorist attacks on energy infrastructure in Azerbaijan or on Jewish institutions as well. But Federica, do you think that the conflict in Iran could also bear some opportunities for the South Caucasus, maybe to increase their strategic importance by creating more connectivity between Europe and Asia?
Well, the short answer is yes. Okay, if for a second we think about a map, right? So Russia, South Caucasus is in the middle. Russia is busy in Ukraine and definitely does not have the capacities or capabilities to do anything else. Iran right now is busy with the US. And in the middle, you have the South Caucasus, right? So none of the two countries can necessarily express power or like exercise power over the region. And at the same time, the Caucasus is connected to the Black Sea. Black Sea, it's part of NATO, it's part of the EU, it's at our doorstep. So by proxy, and not even by proxy, the stabilization of the region is in our direct interest when it comes to keeping our border or keeping our region safe or Europe safe. So I would definitely say that also Russia has demonstrated that it's very, very much capable of using countries in the South Caucasus to conduct hybrid and cyber operations towards countries of the eastern flank. And if you have a look at the geography, it's not even that far away. So the issue, there are two dimensions here where definitely the opportunity for South Caucasus to bridge in or to seize this moment in the moment when the Nordic route is closed, the North Corridor, north-south, that would go from Russia to Iran is closed too. So the only way from Europe to trade or to access to Central Asia and Asia is through the South Caucasus. And this is the potential. And this is why it is in our interest, not only in terms of security, but in broader terms when it comes to being cut off completely from global trade routes. It is in our interest to stabilize and invest in connectivity project in infrastructure. And when it comes to infrastructure, I also want to highlight one point. The war in Ukraine has highlighted the importance of keeping supply chain safe. And we've seen how the importance of protecting civil infrastructure. And it is in our strong interest to not only invest in connectivity and make sure that in South Caucasus there are infrastructure and there are railways, there are highways that allow goods to go from point A to point B through the South Caucasus. But it's also a matter of security, because being cut off, if the South Caucasus is not free, there's other countries exercising influence on it or controlling it. It means that the Europe will be completely in the situation of Iran and Russia being enemies. It will be completely cut out from the global lands. So it is a security, because there is this new, or at least this new trend concept of European economic defense, so protecting civil infrastructure and also supply chains as a way to protect the security of your own country. But it is also a matter of hardcore security when it comes to cyber and hybrid threats. Another thing, the European Union is not only exercising soft power anymore when it comes to the South Caucasus, and it's not only the financial and the long-term project and investment, but it's actually it's part of the EPF, has already given military aid to Armenia. So we are not only financing projects to build infrastructure, but we are also giving military support in terms of course, in financial terms. So this proves that the South Caucasus is a very strategic, is of strategic importance for Europe from a defense and from an economic perspective. And I also want to add the fact that in 2025 there was the peace agreement signed in Washington is another testimony of how the United States perceives the South Caucasus as a strategic checkpoint or a strategic area for the security of the trade routes, but in general for the security of Europe and the transatlantic area.
Thank you. So still a lot of challenges ahead, but we can try to make the best out of it, I see. Okay, so now maybe we can go with the questions from the audience. Who would like to ask a question? Please briefly introduce yourself and keep the question short. Yeah.
Grafenberg, a board member of the EM. I have a question concerning this situation now about the possible corridor between Armenia in between Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan, and there may be examples in the world where it had functioned even for decades. When you think at GDR, German Democratic Republic, there were corridors to West Berlin, several, and even during years of tension, it worked. So who could guarantee such a corridor? How do you see it? Should there be also an outside actor guaranteeing, or you do it among the three of you? It means Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. And then in a way that it is so precise that there shouldn't be, again, problems. How far is this discussion now going? And in any case, before it was mentioned about Georgia turning to another way, it so much depends on personalities. I mean, Saakashvili was clearly to the West, and the population was said to be 70% in favor of EU. But certain Mr. Ivanishvili, he turned it around, and from the background, from month to month, year to year. And in Armenia, we have this other example of Pashinyan and Russia leaving Armenia practically decide and not helping them enough. So like a betrayal. So there would be a fantastic chance now. And if your President Aliyev is ready to be generous, then maybe having a real peace for a longer period, hopefully. How do you see it? I may ask you, Mr. Seno.
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, it was a set of questions, so I'll try to address them very, very quick. Regarding the peace treaty, now there is only one obstacle before the peace treaty between Baku and Yerevan, which is the change of the Armenian constitution, because there is an item which Azerbaijan sees as a territorial claim, and that is the only condition which prevents the full peace treaty from signing. But despite the absence of the codification piece, in other words, the peace treaty, we have several tracks between Armenia and Azerbaijan, such as border demarcation, certain trade and economic engagement and connectivity issues. My whole point is that the absence of the peace treaty does not prevent other sectors from being developed between the two countries. Regarding the route you just mentioned between the mainland Azerbaijan and its Nakhchivan Exley, which is supposed to go through the southern Armenia. Now there is a third actor who is involved there, the United States. They should be part of this trip, and the security guarantee should come from them. But in what form, in what capacity, that will be discussed between Yerevan and Washington. And my big concern is that Iran will try to sabotage this whole initiative because of the American involvement, and it seems Iran is emerging as an undefeated and regional hegemon of this conflict, and even with all these military sufferings and losses and decapitation of its leadership, it is still assertive, and it will become more aggressive towards this route, which involves the Americans. There was one more question, I guess, about.
Oh, but was it about how to get along if you have outside support? You mentioned the US would be active in that, or you just do it among the three countries that you've not with Iran, of course, because Iran is on the other side of the river. There is a river. So they should not be involved.
No, the Iranian regime has several times called that route its red line and opposed to it formally. And most recently, they released another statement by opposing this initiative. So I'm personally expecting certain at least statements or maybe actions in the future from the Iranian side. But Azerbaijan is an interested party in this whole story, of course, but right now the real work is going or must be going between Armenia and the United States. Regarding Armenia, one more point. You mentioned the EU and Russia. Armenia is still formally part of the Russian-led Eurasian structures, and with all the EU help, with the, you also mentioned the military cooperation, it will still be very difficult to harmonize Armenia's presence in both the Eurasian structures and the EU. And this is why at some point in the future, this issue will also be raised as an acute one. And in that case, I think Yerevan will have even now they are facing this dilemma, but at some point, I guess it will be even more acute.
But they froze their membership to the CSTO. Armenia froze. They know it withdraw.
The economic union, though.
Yeah. I mean, I think, but I agree with you. They will have to make a choice at one point. I think it will be also important for the development of the region.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. David Dondua, EU Awareness Center. Georgia was mentioned a number of times during the discussion, and since it seems that I'm the only one from that country. If you allow me a short comment, it's not a question. I have a question, but I can skip it. A short comment about particularly the questions that you asked about the neutrality, whether it might be an option or a new option. It's not new. Neutrality was discussed in Georgia quite extensively, especially in the first years of regaining independence, and it was immediately discounted. It was popping up later, but always it was not a go. Now it came again. It came again, not naturally, but came again by forces that are pro-government, pro-Georgian Dream forces, as a transitional narrative. Not an option, but transitional narrative, because taking into consideration the public attitude to replace West with Russia, it's not doable now. So it's a trick in order to offer some safe alternative. But take into consideration country geography, security environment, economic dependencies, and let alone historical experience, it's not an option for Georgia. And the problem with Georgia was not the choice was wrong. No, I still think that West, Europe, NATO, transatlantic, it was a right choice and is a right choice for Georgia. The problem was that no successive government, no one, built a strong foundation for that, and then put a construction that whoever comes after will have institutions, irrespective of personalities, that work for democracy, work for EU values, and for the principles. And now it has become easy for pro-Russian forces to attack the choice. And now West is blamed of all the failures were the result of mistakes made by our all successive governments.
Thank you. That's a good comment from Georgian perspective. Did you have a question for our?
My question actually was about Iran. It was mentioned, but it was mentioned in the context of a great power competition in tandem with Russia. But let's assume, that's a long perspective, but let's assume that Iran will return to international arena as a full-fledged actor. Knowing Iranian society, there is a chance that they will come back, which I cannot say about Russia. And what happens with our region, with the middle corridor? Do you see Iran as a competitor or as a cooperation partner in terms of our middle corridor and using our geography? Because the ancient Silk Road was running through Persia, not through South Caucasus. Baku and Tbilisi were the outlet where goods were coming for local consumption. The main routes, one but all the routes were coming through Persia. I understand I'm fantasizing, but it might become quite a reality, and we don't know when it might be quite.
Yeah, but it also depends if Iran comes out of this sanction regime as well. If that is the case, yes, in that case, it can be a competitor. If the sanctions remain still, you are looking at the picture very positively, but unfortunately, I am more pessimistic on this, and I think Iran, again, despite its military setback and everything, still have potential to exercise certain influence over South Caucasus and individually in each country. You are coming from Georgia, and you probably have seen these reports about Iran's soft power religious networks and business issues, joint ventures inside Georgia. It has a very strong influence in the Muslim communities of Georgia. There are several reports which came out in February and March, even before the outbreak of the conflict. And in that case, I think it may be a regional spoiler for South Caucasus.
I would like to briefly add, because I completely agree, to get out of the sanctions regime. But I mean, if you look at the fact that this country was attacked by the strongest military in the world, not controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And as an effect of being attacked by the strongest military in the world, they now control it.
Yeah.
So as part of the negotiation, they will apparently still control it. So why should it be that distant? They might just, if they continue at this rate, tomorrow the sanctions will be lifted just so that tomorrow Trump can celebrate his 250th anniversary of the country that he completely brought to the brink of collapse.
The question was not about sanctions, but I mean this ideal perspective.
I know, but who thinks that getting rid of the sanctions would be necessary to take that step? And this might prolong it, but I say they might get out of the sanctions earlier than we think, because if the turn of events continue at the speed that they're continuing at the moment, we might.
It might happen easily.
It will be even worse situation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
This is no. I thought for a better future.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, not here for the optimistic scenario.
Never say never. Never know.
Yeah, thank you. We do have another question.
I would have one additional one because of having mentioned the Iranian influence in Georgia. It's interesting. Armenia for a long time served as an economic partner for Iran, quite successfully for both sides, actually, circumventing also sanctions. Anyhow, now, as we know, at least 25% or even more of the Iranian population are actually Azeri. And I always wondered why you could not get together closer, even in the earlier days in the Shah period or afterwards. Okay, there was a very different ideological situation, but do you see any possibilities for being a little bit closer to the Azeris in Iran, or better to forget about this? And how's about Iranian influence in Azerbaijan? Could there be a danger or not?
Yeah. Even the idea that there are millions of ethnic Azerbaijanis live in Iran, and some estimates show that there can be more ethnic Azerbaijanis in Iran than in our republic. It already gives a lot of paranoia for the regime in Tehran. We have Azerbaijan and Iran. We may have certain economic engagement, like on facade, certain things can look good, but we have very, very strong differences, ideological, historical, etc. The presence of ethnic Azerbaijanis is one of these factors. Another is quite easy. Iran treats Azerbaijan the way Russia sees Ukraine. Its own former backyard, which should be part of this Persian domain. Therefore, another issue which I can raise in this regard is the ideological difference. You have a secular society versus the religious government, theocratic government. This is why these two countries are at odds geopolitically, and unfortunately, these differences will remain for a longer period of time.
Thank you. I think we had another question.
So, hi, my name is Giulia Musso, and I'm working at the Chamber of Commerce in Vienna. And before I was studying in Estonia at the Schütte Institute of Tartu, and I was studying Russian-European relationship and Eurasia.
Which year was that?
Hmm?
Which year was that?
I was 2022.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And yes, and I remained there until, so actually when the war of aggression in Ukraine started. So, and it was the day of liberation of Estonia. So it was like a really like big impact. And we talk a lot in the Institute. And I don't know, hearing what you were talking, I have some provocative questions actually. And yes, the first is that I personally believe Russia is not going to disappear, but we have to learn to deal with it. And I think the big elephant in the room is not only Russia, but for Europe is also USA right now. And we should learn to deal with it in a way that also we can go further, maybe with maybe also with the EU enlargement in order also for other countries to decide freely. I don't know how much is that possible. So my question on you is like, because I think Europe needs an external perspective. We are so internal, like focus on ourselves, and sometimes maybe we need an external perspective on how we can do stuff better. Also because we haven't dealt a lot with Russia before. We just like did as she was not there or he was not there, it was not there. So my question is like how Europe could do better and deal better with it. Second of all is maybe this could be a suggestion. I don't know what you think. You were talking about social rights and human rights. And what I've been hearing being in the Chamber of Commerce is that how we deal is not totally right in the sense of economic perspective. So in a trade agreement should be just a trade agreement. There should not be human rights or social or stuff inside because it's a trade agreement. And I don't know, I came up with the idea maybe like because putting human rights and social rights inside the agreement, we lose a lot of influence outside. And also a lot of possibility. For example, if you look at Africa, if we would have started with just, because now there is a lot of China there, for example. Maybe could be a possibility to start with trade agreement and then be an economic partners and then start to have trust and build trust and then start pushing with soft powers and have more like interferes in this way in social rights. So social rights are important, human rights also. And on the other side, I don't know, I have to think that I have a lot of international friends and I have to feel that Europe is losing it a lot, this soft power, also because what's happening now in Gaza and so on, or around the world, I have to think that international laws have no more values for any countries. And also the fact that how Europe reacts from Ukraine wars and how Europe reacts for the Israel and Gaza wars is different. And I think that some people maybe got the impression, okay, that human are not all people. And also how we react to Israel. And you saw what's happening in the parliament, in the commission, also when a journalist was trying to speak in about it and talk about it. And yes, where is in this sense freedom of speech, for example, we could ask. I don't know. I know it's not that applicable. Well, the journalist could put out of the commission and he could not ask the question. So I don't know. This for me is like a question. But anyway, I don't know if you have opinion or this is just a question that came up from your. This is why I'm asking because I mean I'm not an expert, so I'm just asking. What do you think about it?
Thank you for both your questions. And it's interesting that in such a small room we have an Estonian reunion because I was as well in Tartu in 2022. We had the same experience.
I studied there before you guys actually.
Yeah. And so who would like to address both questions?
I can try. I think most of your provocative questions / comments are kind of linked to the eternal dilemmas of Europe. Is Europe a global player? Is Europe a regional player? And if you look at things a bit more globally, probably we can argue that we are the only or one of the only standing blocks or players that is strongly based on human rights and rule of law that has this as the cardinal rule. We lost the US basically. If you look at all the other countries, all the other players like India, China, arguably they cannot be considered democracy. So the issue now is how much influence we can exercise when we are where we are the only one whose order is based on these values. At the same time, I do not agree that a trade agreement is only a trade agreement, because when you sign a trade agreement with a country, you are putting money into a country, so you are funding a government that suppresses the rights of people in X area. It could be human rights, it could be whatever civil rights you can think of. So it's not just a trade agreement. But the issue is that we have we have a lot of trade agreements with countries that do not align to what are our values. So I think this is another kind of a big question. How do you do that? Because of course you cannot, we have to still keep our economy competitive. We have to trade with other countries, but what about the values part? So even this, it's a dilemma. We really do not know how. I mean, there's not a perfect recipe. I believe there should be at least a threshold under which we should not go, which probably would mean that we should not trade with China at all. But so it's very, very unrealistic to discuss about this without taking into account the fact that trade relations at one point become more important than any of the values you can have, because our economies need sustainment, right? On the question of Russia, I mean, I know there's been a lot of speculation since 2022 about the future of Russia. How do we deal with democratic Russia? Sebastian was saying that Russia will disappear.
No. I said it's one possibility.
Okay.
If we would return to the notion that we've done in the first war, a year of the full-scale invasion, that we were talking about a Ukrainian victory.
Yeah.
If there is a Ukrainian victory, Russia will disappear in the form and shape as it exists now.
I know, but I also do not agree, because I think these imperialistic ideas are so embedded in their genetics. I mean, we can see it with other countries that had a strong colonial past, how this imperialism is still somehow embedded in their foreign policy or defense policy. And imagine Russia. So I still think these ideas, at one point they will wake up and try to, enlarge. I think it's something so, I mean, I know this is just my opinion, but I think this is so embedded in their DNA that they will never not have a Russian problem. Maybe it will be quiet for 100 years, but in 100 years they will have the same issue again. So how do we deal with that? I think in the best case scenario, it's just transactional relations. The same way we are doing with the United States, by the way, because we do not share anything with them anymore, but we are just trying to, I give you this, you give me that, and just for the sake of balance. That's my take on your comment.
Can I just, so to clarify again, I would also fully agree. It doesn't mean, so if the Russian Federation in its current shape and form will disappear, it doesn't mean that the challenges will disappear. There will be different challenges, but there will not be a Russian Federation if there is a Ukrainian full victory with the restoration of the 1991 borders. That is the thing. But this insecurity will be there, and I fully agree. And this is the major point. We're not talking about these possibilities and scenarios that are there, which would arrive at the point that for the foreseeable future we will have the instability. How are we going to deal with it? Regardless if Putin lives forever, which he thankfully will not. Or if tomorrow the troops come home, and you know what will happen if the Russian military comes back to the motherland. And this is one point to why I was flinching at you were quoting at freedom of speech. We have fundamentally forgotten what freedom of speech means, because freedom of speech, without knowing exactly the case, and I'm so happy I don't have to deal with Israel-Palestine, and I certainly have a certain opinion and can criticize the Israeli government. That is absolutely correct. But on the other hand, there are certain things below the surface that are bubbling, which are inherently anti-Semitic, and this is really challenging. But we don't need to listen to each and every opinion. And regardless how that case was and why that happened, freedom of speech is not suppressed because we don't listen to each and every opinion that is out there. That is not suppression of freedom of speech, because that person can exact his freedom of speech, not at any time, not at every place. And this is perfectly fine. But that person is not in jail, is not silenced, can still have his opinion and continue working as a journalist.
Thank you. Well, if you don't want to have anything on that.
No, I'm fine. My colleagues from Europe, they were complaining about Russia. I was about to cry. What are we supposed to do in our region? But yeah,
I put a lot of empathy.
Drive them out.
we,
Send them home.
by the way, yeah, we were the first post-Soviet country who kicked the Russians out. Even we did it before the Baltic states, actually in 1992 or so. Even when they deployed their forces in Karabakh in 2020, many experts, regional observers thought they were there for good. That there is this established myth in the West that the Russians never leave.
Yeah.
But we kicked them second time, it went largely unnoticed in media, but I think it can also serve as a precedent or as an inspiration to other countries such as Georgia or Ukraine and Moldova that they can actually leave. We kicked them out twice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. If we don't have any other pressing question in the audience, I think we can wrap up with a final round of one question, because we talked about so many topics today, but I would like to come back to the title of our event, the South Caucasus in Transition. And behind that, we have three concepts: connectivity, regional cooperation, and European perspective. For each of you, what do you think is the concept we should focus on right now, our priority? Erika, do you want to start?
I think regional cooperation and connectivity are strictly linked. And I think one step back, in 2023, during the GlobSec Forum, that was the last edition in Bratislava, I actually organized a panel with representatives from Armenia, Azerbaijan to discuss about regional cooperation and connectivity as means and vehicles to a prosperous, stable future. Now, we know what happened in September then, and I strongly, and these were some of the takeaways of that discussion I still remember to these days, and I think all parties agreed how prosperity, common understanding, trust, and understanding that borders are not defensive walls, but actually opportunities for working and building things together can be a good way to overcome centuries or decades, in this case, of hostilities. So I think I think these countries have a great potential, especially Armenia and Azerbaijan have a great responsibility, but also towards their people, and a great potential to, through a common project and so connect, and so financial means, they can really make the region more prosperous and create a better condition for their people to live together in peace.
Very good points raised by Federica. But if I would have to go with one, I would love to focus rather more on European perspectives, but I guess that the regional cooperation thing, and that's probably something that we should also focus on within the European Union, to have more regional integration, which will then make it easier to have European.
A very original question, by the way. I would also say regional cooperation, which may include connectivity in European perspective and other dimensions as well.
Well, thank you very much to the three of you for this very interesting discussion, and thank you to the audience for your interest and for your questions as well. A special thanks to the IDM team who helped organizing the event. And well, right now I can invite you to follow us on our social media platforms, like we are at IDM Vienna. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, and you can also consider becoming an IDM member to support our work. And feel free to stay a tiny bit longer, because right now we will sign the Memorandum of Understanding. And well, I'm Nino Butlu, and it was my pleasure to host this event today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Finally got the point.
Yes, I actually have been following your link. So I read a lot of writers. I'm from Italy, yes. I'm from Italy, but I've been living, I lived here for say a year and then 5 years in Barcelona.
Yeah, because of the years of college stuff.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah. I went actually when I went to Baku, everybody told me, do you know Simona? I was like, I'm not alive in my country, but I heard about her. So
Peter, you staying? Can
well,
you stay a bit longer?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not leaving.
Okay.
the page or the last page?
The last page. Morning. It's the first part of the memorandum. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you can clap if you like. Huh? Very excited too. Yeah. You keep this.
Yes.
Please take it. Take it if you want. Yeah. Thank you. And now, Nino, Philip, we also need to take a picture. Thank you. Thank you. Oh.
Well aware about Georgia and
We are still set for our, we are hoping to back soon on the right track.
yeah.